Before we begin, take a deep breath and let the noise of the day slowly fade. Unclench your jaw, soften your eyes, and let the weight of modern life melt away. Tonight, we're not chasing action or drama. We're wandering into the forgotten corridors of boring history, where medieval echoes linger and dark tales unfold like fading ink on parchment. Welcome to Midnight Sleepless, a resting place for tired minds, where the Middle Ages, ancient empires, and strange, dark history. Stories drift by like soft clouds. Here, knights, castles, and quiet empires return not with a roar, but with a whisper. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? And if you enjoyed these slow, sleepy journeys through medieval times, boring facts, and forgotten worlds. A gentle tap on the subscribe button helps keep this calm storytelling alive. Now, let the story begin. Asterisk. Before the sun peeks over the gabled rooftops of Tudor London, before the sound of hooves or hucksters fills the narrow alleys of Fleet Street, a faint ribbon of gold seeps through a modest upper-story window. The glow is dim but steady, glimmers off rain-streaked panes, and warms the aged mullions that frame a scene of tranquil industry. Inside, in a room no larger than a hayloft, a tailor rises. His bed is tucked beside a loom of dark wood and a chest of folded remnants. There is no division between life and labor, here only a shared space marked by worn floorboards, faded tapestries, and attempts in the air of pressed wool, old starch, and beeswax. His first breath of the day tastes of cloth and fire. His first action is not a stretch, nor a prayer, but the slow, instinctive reach for his shears, those iron companions, dulled at the handle, but sharp at the hinge. This is not a grand guild hall, nor a bustling merchant stall in Cheapside. No apprentices clatter down staircases just yet. No fabric seller knocks with samples from Genoa or Flanders. Instead, it is a sanctuary of silence and precision, where mornings begin not with noise, but with the brushing of fingers against broadcloth and the clink of tools on oak. The tailor, a man of near 50 winters, ties his apron with habitual ease. The knot rests against his back in the same spot it has for decades. He doesn't need a mirror. His fingers remember the folds, the flow, the firmness of each cloth. The candle beside him flickers, tallow pooling at its base. Its glow clings to the silver edge of the shears, catching on their curve as they rise and begin the day's first cut to an onlooker. The life of a Tudor tailor may seem small, almost hidden, folded into the seams of society. Yet, his work touched every rank, from regaring apprentices to brocaded aldermen, from noblewomen in damask gowns to widows in modest kersey. He was neither servant nor noble, artisan nor common laborer, skisted between layers, much like the garments he crafted. And within those layers lived the quiet codes of a civilization: class, law, ambition. Tailoring. Tailoring in Tudor times was not a simple act of sewing. It was, in many ways, a form of translation. Colors spoke of wealth. Silhouettes hinted at allegiance. A slash of crimson might mean royal favor. A velvet collar might be a mark of aspiration or presumption. Tailor was bound not only by tape and thread, but by sumptuary laws that dictated who could wear what. One stitch too bold, one button too fine, and both client and craftsman risked the watchful eye of authority. The workshop reflects that tension. Old, stoic, disciplined. The work table bears its scars, proudly a nicked surface darkened by wax and years. Beside it rests a pot of homemade starch brewed from bread crusts and ash water. The shears, heavier than they look, glide through cloth with practiced grace, dividing wool like butter. Chalk pebbles, once long sticks, rest in a small clay dish. Tinged ochre and gray. He lays out a bolt of woolen dyed, rough, reliable. It is for a tradesman, one who values strength over style. His fingers smooth the fabric, not with his palms, but with the edges of his hands. Palm oil leaves marks. Pressure warps drape. A good tailor handles cloth as one might handle memory, gently, precisely. Outside, the world begins to stir. A milkmaid calls to a passing boy. A baker throws open his shutters. The bells at St. Bride's ring 6 times, soft, distant, like echoes in fog. But in the tailor's room, time is measured differently, not by bells, but by stitches. Not by hours, but by hems. He approaches a doublet's back seam, a curve that must support the wearer without binding him. The placement is everything. Repins, adjusts. Only when the fabric yields, just so, does he begin the stitch. It is slow, deliberate, soundless, save for the whisper of thread pulling through wool. Each needle prick is a note in a silent symphony. By the 7th hour, the apprentices arrive. 2 boys, gangly and alert, bow slightly before beginning their routines, sweeping the floor of yesterday's threads, boiling glue in the brazier pot, and laying out scraps to sort. They speak rarely and only in hushed tones. The workshop is a place of reverence. The tailor continues without pause. A padded shoulder here, a lined cuff there. He hums, low and tuneless, a relic of his youth when his own father, a cobbler, sang as he worked. Now the tailor sings only in breath and movement. His apprentices don't recognize the tune. He is older than they are. He shifts to measuring. In Tudor England, measurements were not mere numbers. They were stories, translated into panels and darts. There were no standard sizes, no patterns to download. Everybody told a different tale of posture, of labor, of health, of pride. The tailor reads shoulders like others read books. A slight forward lean tells of desk work, a wide stance of writing. Tape glides around waists, down spines, across clavicles. Ink scratches notes onto parchment. Red thread means adjustment. Blue is for master cuts. No words are needed. The tailor's face is still. His eyes see, but do not stare. His hands record more than rulers ever could. The apprentices watch, ink stains spreading on their own fingers, trying to learn not just the measurements, but the grace. The smell of the workshop changes as the day warms. Glue simmers. Wool steams under pressing irons. The brazier's embers glow beneath a battered kettle, warming soup made from carrots, onions, and yesterday's crust. Hunger floats in the air, but is ignored. Midday is not yet come. A new delivery arrives at Dimisk. Deep green, from an Italian merchant. Costly stuff, to become a gown for a merchant's wife who wishes to ascend in station. The tailor inspects it with solemn care. He knows it must be cut modestly, despite the wealth behind it. Too much flair, and it invites scrutiny. Too little, and it insults the client. Balance, again. He thinks of his first solo garment, years ago, for a coal merchant's son. A simple jerkin, but it had taken weeks, each seam redone 3 times. The boy had since grown, but still returned each winter. Loyalty, he thinks, is stitched, not spoken. As the sun passes its peak, the apprentices break for their meal. The tailor does not. He continues, his needle gliding through a jerkin's side seam. He works in silence, but his mind is busy. He thinks of the old tailor who taught him, long dead, of the man's thick accent and thicker knuckles, of the way he used to hum the same tune when smoothing sleeves. The tailor's fingers pause on a trimmed collar. It's for a middle-class merchant, a man with ambition, but not quite access. The colors must be rich, yet within regulation. A soft navy with ochre lining. Just enough trim to suggest success, not arrogance. The tailor nods to himself. Yes, this will do. Afternoon wanes. Shadows stretched long across the floor. Next, one apprentice presses a collar with a warm iron, using damp muslin to prevent shine. Another darns a tear in a client's old hose. No music, no idle talk. Just the occasional pop of the fire and the gentle rhythm of labor. There is peace here, not the peace of idleness, but of purpose. A room full of motion, yet quiet as a prayer. And here lies the heart of the tailor's world, a humble shop filled with needles and chalk, but also with law, desire, memory. Every stitch is a record. Every garment a whisper of a story not loudly told. As the candle's light softens and dusk draws in, he sets down his shears. The doublet before him is unfinished, but that is good. Tomorrow has its beginning. He stands slowly, joints creaking like old leather. Hate washes his hands in cool rosemary water, the scent chasing away the day's residue. The apprentices gather. Their things. There are no goodbyes, only nods. The rhythm will resume at dawn. They all know it. He pinches the candle wick, draws the shutters. The workshop surrenders to dark. Outside, Fleet Street bustles. Inside, the silence is complete. And as we step back from this small, golden-lit room tucked above the city's noise, we might wonder not about kings or laws, but about hands like his. Quiet hands, careful hands. Hands that shaped Tudor England, not with fanfare, but with thread. In Tudor England, clothing was never merely fabric. It was never simply chosen, worn, or discarded. It was declaration, subtle yet fierce, silent yet deeply understood. A sleeve, a button, the edge of a cloak, each detail spoke a language, as strict and layered as any parchment decree. Dress, for the Tudor people, was a matter not only of taste, but of law, obedience, birth, and place. To step into public space was to enter a stage where every figure, whether lord or laborer, played their part through the garments they bore. One did not merely wear clothing. One performed it, calibrated not for comfort or whim, but for status, for legality, and for the deeply entrenched rituals of social display. Let us begin our quiet walk not within the golden echo of a royal court, but in the dew-soft stillness of a provincial English morning, perhaps in a Wiltshire parish or small Kentish town. Sky hangs low with mist. A distant chimney exhales wood smoke. The earth smells of moss and soaked thatch, cobbled. Lanes wind like lazy stitches between timber-framed homes. And the autumn air curls cold at the edges of sleeves. Here, on this quiet morning, we watch the world dress itself. A tailor's apprentice lingers by the green, idly rubbing chalk into his palms. From his place of waiting, he observes the slow unfurling of the social fabric. A yeoman's wife passes in a rough-spun cloak of undyed wool, plain at the hem, tied loosely at the neck, respectable, modest, unornamented. Her eyes scan the hedgerow, not the people. She knows her place. Behind her, the local squire walks with a straighter spine. His doublet is cut close to the ribs, dyed a dull wine hue, trimmed with narrow strips of tawny velvet. Rich, but not ostentatious, a calculated display. His boots gleam with fresh blacking. A child darts past in coarse linen, his shirt uneven at the collar, frayed from hand meat. Yet, even this boy, barely 8, signals his family's position, without saying a word. This language of cloth was not abstract. It was codified, enforced, and repeated across decades by the crown, known as the sumptuary statutes. These laws dictated not only what could be afforded, but what was legally permitted based on birth, office, income, and allegiance. They formed an invisible fence around every body, stitched into the very seams of daily life. Silk, for instance, was not for everyone. Only nobles of a certain rank might wear it in public, and even then, within limits. Purple, drawn from the most prized dyes of the Mediterranean, was strictly reserved for royalty. Velvet, satin, fur, all bore invisible padlocks. And the keys to these locks were held not by weavers or merchants, but by the monarchy to defy. This code, to wear above one's station, was no simple matter of vanity. It was seen as a challenge to the divine order of society, a transgression that could unravel the moral fabric of the kingdom. A man in lace above his wage was eyed with suspicion. A woman in imported damask was ridiculed, perhaps fined. The tailor became not just a craftsman, but a quiet adjudicator, an interpreter of both aspiration and law. He needed to know instinctively what his client was entitled to wear, what fibers, what buttons, what cuts. To offer too much was to endanger them. To offer too little was to insult. His trade balance, not only scissors and thread, but social calculus. Cloth varied, too, not only by legality, but by access. The gentry wore the fine wools of the Low Countries, thick velvet imported from Italy, and stiff Holland linen that rustled with each movement. Their garments held starch and structure, visible markers of wealth and stillness. The middling sorts, merchants, skilled tradesmen, and their families, dressed in sturdy broadcloth and fustian, a durable blend of cotton and linen. These garments were practical, weather-ready. It still bore hints of ambition. A fine collar here, a brighter dyed there. The poor, meanwhile, wore the worn and reworn clothes passed from mother to daughter, patched, repurposed, stiff with labor. These garments bore the smells of the hearth, the churn, the field. They sagged at the elbows, were heavy at the hem. But even here, dignity clung in small acts: a well-mended sleeve, a pressed apron, a ribbon stitched in carefully for Sunday. But within each class, nuance still reigned. The number of buttons one could display, and their materials marked wealth. The width of a cuff, the angle of a collar, the fullness of a skirt's pleats, all were measured acts. Even slashing, that popular Tudor style of cutting garments to reveal an inner lining, had limits. Done tastefully by the elite, it was admired. Done excessively by a commoner, it raised eyebrows. The streets, then, were not gray. They shimmered with coated color. A gentlewoman's kirtle peeked out in saffron beneath a dark overgown. A merchant's apprentice wore blue livery, the crest of his guild stitched proudly at the shoulder. Even colors had meaning. Black, so often misunderstood today as somber or plain, was in fact costly, a luxury, requiring time, imported dye, and constant upkeep. Red was bold and legalistic, often associated with magistrates and clergy. Green, with its pleasant neutrality, was a favorite of the upwardly mobile head, where it carried its own dialect. Gentry wore tall, felted hats adorned with feathers, gold cords, or stitched pearls. The tradesmen wore flat caps of wool, often paste-stiffened. A maid in service kept her hair tightly bound under a linen coif. A widow might lay veils of mourning, black. A bride might pin her plaits with ribbons the color of rosewater. And scent, yes, even scent, marked the social line. A nobleman's cloak might hold the faint aroma of cloves, lavender, or imported oils. A butcher's jerkin might carry the musk of salt and brine. The village tailor, who handled all cloths, might bear traces of beeswax, chalk, damp wool, and starch, the smell of careful hands at work. As the day moved forward, the sun rising over roofs of slate and stone, these textile codes were everywhere. In London, on a narrow street where a baker passed a magistrate, words were unnecessary. The baker's sleeves were rolled, his apron singed at the edge, his jerkin simple and heat-worn. The magistrate's cloak swept behind him, dark with dye, pressed and stately. Their eyes might never meet, but their clothing had already spoken. These encounters, hundreds of them each day, knit together a world governed by visibility and restraint. The sumptuary laws were not always enforced harshly. but their presence hovered like smoke. On feast days and festivals, local officials might scrutinize the crowd. A merchant's daughter wearing lace might earn a quiet warning. A farmhand with silver buttons might be laughed at by neighbors. In this subtle dance, the tailor remained essential. His was a shop not only of measurements, but of muted confession. Clients came with hope in their eyes, hesitations in their fingertips. A young merchant's wife might say she needed something simple while lingering too long over the imported satins. A clerk might pause at a swatch of damask, then settle with a sigh for honest broadcloth. The tailor offered not only garments, but possibilities. A richer lining, discreet. A velvet collar, hidden beneath a cloak. Clever pleats that suggested volume. Imitation braid that mimicked costlier trim. The best tailors were illusionists, crafting dignity out of affordable thread. Among the servant classes, too, there were codes. A footman wore livery, the colors of the house, not his choosing. A cook might have a greased dark apron singed with thick rope. A nursemaid's kirtle might be brown wool, worn smooth from carrying children. They dressed for duty, not for self. Even among the poorest, clothing was memory. In village homes, a girl might wear her grandmother's skirt, resewn into a bodice. A man might still wear the cloak he married and patched. Yes, but meaningful. In frost-touched parishes, a woman might add a cross-stitch to a patch, not for fashion, but for pride. Each mark was a signature, silent but lasting. Textile access shifted by region. In the north, wool dominated, heavy, scratchy, warm. In ports, traders brought linen and cotton, brightening the streets with Flemish dyes and patterns. In cities, the variety exploded. A stranger walking through York might count 10 distinct textures before reaching the end of the lane. And on Sundays, Sundays came the clearest expression of self. At church, parishioners arrived in their best. Aprons were bleached. Cloaks were lined with whatever fur or stuffing could be afforded. Shoes, if owned, were shined with tallow. Hands were scrubbed. And still, in that sacred space, the distinctions held. Kneeling side by side, a clerk in black serge and a milkmaid in homespun wool still whispered their place with every hem and stitch. Among scholars and clerics, dress was more subdued, but no less loaded. A scholar's robe might be plain, but the black dye was expensive, marking his seriousness. Ink, paper, and candle smoke lingered on his cuffs. His clothes were not rich, but they commanded respect, and all the while, garments remembered. A hem recalled a wedding. Sleeve, bordier, smudge of a child's grip. Collar, frayed in the same spot each winter. Clothing held more than status. It held memory, layered gently across years. As dusk descended, the golden edge of day folded into shadow. Garments softened. Public codes gave way to private comforts. Bodices were unfastened. Stockings were eased down. A nobleman might loosen his doublet and feel, for the first time that day, the breath of evening on his skin. A laundress might sit by the hearth, shawl around her shoulders, resting her hands from the day's scrubbing. In the crooked arteries of 16th century London, where alleyways curved like questions and timber-framed houses leaned over streets as if to gossip with their neighbors, a boy rose before dawn. The light had not yet cracked the horizon. Sky was the color of unbleached wool, and the air hung heavy with the mingled scents of ash, cused, damp stone, and the faint bitterness of coal smoke. That boy, older than 12, perhaps 11, stood barefoot on the wooden floor of a small, upstairs room above a tailor's shop. His apprenticeship had just begun in Tudor England. Becoming an apprentice wasn't merely about acquiring a trade. It was a vow of time and obedience, a formative exile from the comforts of one's own home. Families often arranged apprenticeships through guild connections, and a contract was signed binding a boy to a master tailor for 7 long years. 7 years to sleep beneath the same roof, obey without question, and work until fingers ached and patience ran thin. He was not alone. Across London, dozens of boys like him were scattered in similar workrooms, each inhaling the same mingled scents of beeswax, scorched linen, damp wool, and lye, each slowly learning how to sit, how to sweep, how to disappear into the rhythm of labor. The tailor's workshop was not large, but it was precise. The long central bench bore the weight of a world in cloth shears worn smooth by decades of handling. Chalk, worn down to pebbles, bone awls, and goose quills, sorted neatly beside iron weights. Bolts of fabric rose in silent towers along the walls, thick, brown broadcloth at the bottom, dusky kerseys and fustings above. And at the top, velvets and damasks reserved for noble clients. Near the brazier, the tailor himself stood at work, already cutting, already silent. His authority radiated not from speech, but from certainty. The boy's first tasks were humble. Sweep the floor before the city stirred. Light the brazier. Fetch fresh water. Stir the glue. Each movement was expected to be quiet and sure, and failure was met not with rage, but with disappointment, far heavier burden. The workday began before the bells of St. Mary le Bow chimed 6 times. There was no easing into it. Even the earliest hours were layered with meaning. The boy learned to observe without interruption. His eyes followed every action of the master. How he curled a sleeve with his fingers rather than pressing it flat. How he measured not just with the cord, but with his eyes and instinct. Watching was an apprenticeship in itself. The apprentice was not taught in words, but in silence. When the tailor worked, he worked. When he listened to a client, he did so without interruption. The boy came to understand that learning the trade was like learning a language that could not be spoken aloud. He absorbed it through presence, repetition, and the humility of not knowing. He began to notice the voices of fabrics. Wool made a sound when handled a soft, burdened sigh. Linen whispered like distant water. Velvet resisted, haughty and strong. These sounds became familiar, like bells in the distance marking time. The tailor said little. His correction came through small gestures and lifted eyebrow, a repositioned hand, the quiet redoing of a seam. Praise was nearly non-existent, and yet when the master passed by a sample stitch without removing it, that silence was louder than any compliment. Evenings brought no real rest. After the shutters were drawn and the city settled into its fires and shadows, the boy took his scraps to the far corner and practiced. Long, awkward stitches, too tight, then too loose. But with time, the rhythm grew steady, his fingers less clumsy, his back less stiff. Sometimes the master sat nearby, mending a hem or inspecting a finished doublet. He never spoke, but his presence steadied the boy's hands, and when he gave a single, wordless nod of approval, the boy felt it like a sunrise. Weeks turned into months. The boy began to wake with the first bell, not out of obligation, but habit. He knew the order of the day before it was spoken. Shears were set out in advance. Chalk was trimmed. The glue pot warmed. Slowly, the fear of mistakes gave way to attentiveness. By the end of the first year, he was permitted small responsibilities, trimming linings, threading needles, hemming under the master's eye. Each action still came with scrutiny, but now also with trust. In the second and third years, the tasks deepened. He was allowed to cut not full garments, but sleeves, bodice panels, and pocket linings, always in cheaper fabric. Always with care. When he handled shears, his arms strained under their weight, but the blade's soft rasp through cloth became a song. When it cut cleanly, it sang true. When it faltered, his heart sank. He learned to stretch damp wool on curved boards for shaping, to use muslin as a buffer under the iron, to stitch sleeves so they moved with the arm, not against it. He studied the curves of a shoulder like a sculptor, in the drop of a hem like a sailor studies sails in wind. The tailor watched, always, rarely correcting now, often allowing space to self-correct. The apprentice had grown into the language of cloth, no longer a listener, but a participant, outside. The shop, London Post, K. Meat vendors hollered. Carts rumbled across cobblestones. The Thames carried barges and fishwives' shouts. Inside, only the whisper of thread, the slow draw of shears, and the scrape of iron across wool filled the air. The shop was a sanctuary, a space apart. Mistakes still happened. Seams bunched, sleeves twisted. He would unpick and redo, and the master would watch, neither cruel nor kind, but present. Precision was expected, not for pride, but for necessity. A poorly cut doublet could insult a client, violate sumptuary laws, or worse, reflect badly on the master's name. In his 4th year, the apprentice was allowed to take measurements. He approached clients with bowed head, hands clean, tape prepared. A gentleman might request ease at the shoulder for swordplay. A widow might want her gown modest, but well fitted. Every client told their story in posture and tone. The apprentice listened, not just to words, but to fabric choice, gesture, budget, status. He learned that tailoring was not only about measurement, but about reading people. Festivals came and went. The queen paraded in silks. Courtiers changed fashion as often as the moon. But inside the shop, tradition held firm. Iron, thread, beeswax, and patience. By his 5th year, the apprentice took on commissions, simple garments for servants, children, or distant relatives of clients. They brought no coin, but they brought experience. Each one stitched under his name, though spoken only within the walls of the workshop. He began teaching, too. A younger boy had arrived, hands trembling with inexperience. The older apprentice offered small guidance. How to stretch thread across beeswax just once. How to press with heat and cloth, not brute force, he taught gently, remembering his own beginnings. In these years, mastery became muscle memory. A collar was no longer a puzzle, but a familiar friend. Buttonholes were shaped with a flick of the wrist. Pleats folded like paper birds. There was poetry in the repetition, ritual in the rhythm. Then, in his 7th year, came the quiet ceremony. One morning, as sun filtered pale through the warped window glass, the master laid a doublet on the bench. It was perfect bridge brown wool, lined in ochre, brass buttons gleaming. The apprentice recognized it as his own work, completed under guidance, but with his hands tapped beside the collar. No words, it would be presented as the master's piece, in keeping with guild tradition. But both knew who had shaped it. The boy was nearly a man now. Soon, he would be free, no longer an apprentice, but a journeyman. He could seek new work, rent a bench in another shop, or dream if fortune allowed of opening his own. But that morning, he returned to the bench. The shears fit in his hand as they always had. The wax warmed in his palm. The sleeve needed pressing, and he pressed it, slow and sure. He did not rush. There was no need. The world outside remained loud and quick. Inside, the rhythm held, and one might wonder, watching his bent head and steady hands, what exactly had he mastered? Was it only cloth, seams, and stitches? Or had he learned something deeper, how to shape the formless into function, how to listen without speaking, how to move through the world with quiet purpose and enduring care? Perhaps both. Perhaps that is what tailoring truly meant. Not just fitting fabric to form, but shaping a life through patience, precision, and grace. Beneath the polished grandeur of Tudor nobility, Beneath the rich velvets, slashed sleeves, and gold-threaded embroidery was a world not gilded in fame, but shaped by steady hands and silent endurance. The garments of kings and courtiers, admired in candlelit halls and echoed in the tapestries of time, did not appear from thin air. They were born in the dim-lit workrooms of tailors, pressed into being by the invisible army of artisans who understood fabric like a language. Our story does not begin in a palace, but in a modest back room of a tailor's house in Southern, just across the Thames from the grandeur of Westminster. The walls are timbered and drafty, their edges softened by time and soot. The scent in the air is of wool, beeswax, lavender, and the sharp metallic taps of scissors. A single candle gutters on the table, illuminating the bowed back of a journeyman tailor as he leans over a bolt of deep green velvet. He does not look up. His hands speak for him. This cloth, soft and thick as moss, is to become a court coat. Not just any coat, but one to grace the shoulders of a nobleman whose presence at court demands attention. Velvet was the province of privilege. To wear it was to whisper one's wealth. To tailor, it was to understand restraint. The fabric cannot be rushed. Velvet remembers every crease, every touch. The tailor smooths it gently with his knuckles, not his palms, coaxing it into submission without bruising its pile. Across from him, his assistant, a young woman with quick eyes and quieter hands, readies the lining. Fine linen, bleached bone white and scented from weeks spent in lavender-strewn chests, is sliced with a crisp, clean sound. She folds each cut piece in order, laying them carefully like pages of a manuscript yet to be bound. Their movements are silent ballet. Words, when they come, are short, purposeful. A stitch explained, a grain corrected. The construction of a Tudor coat is less a matter of sewing than of engineering. The outer shell, rich and visible, hides a world of unseen purpose. Stiffened canvas to shape the chest and shoulders, soft padding to support the wearer's posture, and linen closest to the body to breathe and protect. Each layer plays its role. Each is cut, shaped, and basted with near religious attention before the final stitching begins. In these stitches, some tiny and invisible, others long and meant for removal, must follow a rhythm of their own. The tailor's fingers move by instinct, honed by years of repetition. He works by daylight, where possible, by candle or rushlight when it fails. His eyes are not fixed on style alone, but on balance. He sees where weight must fall, where fabric must yield. To the nobleman, the coat will be a symbol. To the tailor, it is a problem solved with grace. Sleeves come last. They are the most complex, for they must allow movement without betraying structure. Drafted carefully, they are attached with silent prayer. The seam is pulled, smoothed, pinned. The curve of the armhole must mirror nature. An error of a single finger's breadth would disrupt the entire line. When satisfied, the tailor begins to sew. Slow, methodical, exacting. Outside, rain begins to fall. The window fogs with the breath of the room, mingling with the faint aroma of wool and wax. Another candle is lit. In this room, time is not marked by clocks, but by the toll of the church bell, the emptying of a spool of thread, the fading of daylight. In the stillness, the coat takes form, but the tailor does not work alone. The cloth itself has passed through many hands. The merchant who carried it from Flanders, the dyer who teased green from leaves and lichen, the weaver who turned flax into linen. All of them are present, invisibly, in the workshop. Their craft joins with his. The coat is not his alone. It is theirs. By the second day, the structure is nearly complete. Layers of linen and canvas form a scaffold onto which the velvet is coaxed and basted. Button loops are cut and waxed, each measured to the millimeter. The assistant, her hands nimble and steady, checks each for tension. These loops must last not just through wear, but through habit, idle hands, twisting buttons, and courtly distraction. The buttonholes themselves are small artworks stitched in silk, reinforced at the edges with careful crosswork. A knock at the door interrupts the silence. A delivery, 12 brass buttons, warm to the touch, each embossed with a nobleman's crest. Payment is given, a quiet thanks exchanged. The tailor holds one up to the candlelight. It catches the flame, throwing back a muted gleam. Now the sleeves, now the most delicate seam, pinned, examined, adjusted. A single ripple across the back could betray the entire cut. The tailor places each stitch slowly, his breath steady, his back aching. Outside, the world moves. Carriages pass. Children shout. But here, only the whisper of wool, the press of thumb against fabric, the soft rasp of shears. By twilight, the coat stands on its frame, not yet finished, but breathing. The collar rises with subtle defiance. The front panels fall with silent authority. It is beautiful, but that is not the aim. It must feel inevitable, as though it could never have been made another way. The next morning brings the fitting. The nobleman arrives with his valet, cloaked in formality and scented faintly of cloves. His expression is unreadable as the coat is lifted onto his shoulders. For a brief moment, the room holds its breath. It fits, not perfectly. A pull here, a tightness there. He lifts his arms, rotates at the waist. The tailor watches, chalk in hand, noting the slightest strain. A sleeve will be let out, a seam adjusted. The nobleman speaks little. He does not need to. The coat does the talking. He departs. The room exhales. The final adjustments begin. A T. Armhole is eased. A button shifted. Every change precise. Every stitch with purpose. By evening, the coat is ready. It is wrapped in linen, tied with twine, set aside for delivery. No mark identifies the tailor. No signature is hidden beneath the lining. Its craft, like that of so many others in his trade, is anonymous. And yet, in court, when the nobleman turns and the green velvet ripples in the light of 100 torches, the tailor is present. That evening, the tools are cleaned and laid in place. New orders await. A black worsted coat for a merchant, a pair of hose for a churchman, which will demand the same patience, the same care. And so the rhythm begins again. Thread waxed, chalk lifted, fabric unfurled. The quiet labor of dignity, never named, always felt. In every stitch, a silent echo of hands long vanished. Of beauty made not for praise, but because some work is worth doing well. And perhaps, when next you see a portrait or a folded coat behind glass, you might look more closely. Not at the name beneath it, but at the seams, the sleeves, the fall of the cloth. We wonder whose hands made this. And how many such lives passed quietly, shaping the way history chose to dress itself. In the Tudor world, garments were not merely items of clothing. Every hem, every sleeve, and every trim whispered a deeper message. Beneath the folds of fabric lay a subtle language of law and hierarchy, enforced not only by statute, but by custom, scrutiny, and whispered disapproval. In a society structured rigidly by class, what one wore did not simply reflect personal taste or comfort. It echoed identity, aspiration, and boundaries. These boundaries were enforced by the sumptuary laws, web of regulations, designed to define and confine social ranks through clothing. While such laws had existed in England long before, they were honed to a sharp point during the Tudor era. Particularly under Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, these monarchs used attire as a form of control, showing that one's garments visibly displayed one's place within the social pyramid. Let us travel back to Tudor England, to a town like Norwich. The morning air hangs cold and clean, carrying the scent of hearth smoke and damp stone. Along narrow lanes, merchants display their wares, while tailors unfurl bolts of cloth with care. Among the crowd walks a young weaver, his eyes drawn to a bolt of richly dyed wool, a deep crimson, soft to the touch. It tempts him, but he turns away. Not because of cost alone, but because it is forbidden. Sumptuary statutes were meticulous. Only those earning a certain income or holding specific titles could wear certain colors or fabrics. Crimson, purple, and deep blue were often restricted, their dyes expensive, and their symbolism royal. Fabrics like velvet and satin were likewise guarded. Even the length of a train or the width of a sleeve could mark a legal transgression. Tailors lived in careful navigation of these laws. They were not mere craftsmen. They were mediators between desire and decree. Many were required to report clients who sought to overstep legal limits, but in quieter towns, discretion often replaced duty. A tailor might suggest a different trim, a humbler fabric, a color that flirted with luxury but remained within bounds. These adjustments were acts of diplomacy, preserving both dignity and legality. The laws themselves read like inventories of aspiration and restraint. Dukes and marquises could wear cloth of gold, while only knights of the garter might don doublets trimmed in golden lace. Lesser nobility and wealthy merchants were limited to damask or silk of certain types. Commoners, even prosperous ones, were confined to wool fustian and unadorned linen. In London, where royal officials patrolled public spaces, enforcement was more direct. Fines and public reprimands awaited those who dared dress above their rank. But in rural communities, the rules softened. A merchant's wife might wear a bold ribbon on holy days. Clerk might purchase better wool and pretend it was coarser. Children often wore clothes that hinted at upward mobility, subtle forecasts of the futures their parents hoped for them. Still, there were consequences. A man in a forbidden hue might be forced to remove his garment in public. A woman adorned in prohibited fur could be fined or have the item confiscated. Such punishments were less about pain and more about public shame, which, in a society obsessed with reputation, was punishment enough. Despite these limitations, or perhaps because of them, a quiet ingenuity flourished. People became adept at navigating the edges of legality. Onion skins dyed linen to mimic richer shades. Embroidery, done in coarse thread, could mimic finer patterns. Beeswax gave common cloth a satiny sheen. Every stitch became a negotiation between law, identity, and hope. Sumptuary laws were framed as protectors of social order, meant to prevent pride, extravagance, and the erosion of clear social lines. But pride, like water, seeped into seams, found its way into cuffs and collars. It shimmered in muted colors and lingered in the drape of well-cut, lawful cloth. Let us linger now in a small tailor's shop. A tradesman has entered, seeking something proper but sharp. The tailor understands. The cloth must be fine, but not luxurious. The buttons gleaming, but not gilded. The lining colored, but not so brightly as to offend. A woman, his wife, follows quietly. Kay rests a moment, too long on a swatch of damask. She says nothing, but the tailor offers a modest wool with faint embroidery. It is a compromise, understood by all present in the countryside. Feast days and fairs brought people together, and clothing became a silent conversation. A farmer's daughter might wear a bodice dyed with leftover berries. A widow might transform her husband's cloak into a garment for her son. These were not just economic choices, but carefully considered acts of social awareness. To overdress was to invite gossip. To underdress was to signal decline. Yet even within these constraints, creativity thrived. A housewife might edge a collar with elderberry-dyed thread. A young man might pleat his sleeves just so, catching the light like satin. For those seeking advancement through marriage, employment, or favor clothing slightly above one's station became a kind of coded ambition. Under Elizabeth I, these laws grew more elaborate. Detailed proclamations outlined precisely who could wear what, from furs to fabrics to the decoration on a hood. Guilds, especially the merchant tailors, were charged with enforcing compliance, but reputation often mattered more than rules. A tailor who bent the law discreetly could gain a loyal clientele. Thus, clothing became a language. Too rich, and one was vain. Too plain, and one was suspect. The ideal lay in balanced hand image, carefully curated to match not just one's income, but one's expected place. Fabrics themselves held memories. One-dyed wool faded softly with time. Flax-spun linen grew gentler with every wash. Canvas used to reinforce garments bore the marks of labor. Every piece chosen, stitched, and worn was a quiet nod to both individual life and collective structure. Sumptuary laws endured not as blaring mandates, but as background hums, bent often, broken rarely. They lingered in choices made in dim workshops, at kitchen tables, in the early light of feast day mornings, as twilight falls on our Tudor town. The market's quiet, and shutters close. The day's finery is set aside. Is in its place come woolen nightgowns, worn shifts, and threadbare cloaks. These are garments of comfort, not class. Around hearths, families gather in simple attire. The distinctions of the day softened by firelight and rest. Here, the law cannot reach. A constable might overlook a slightly fine ribbon. A guild warden might ignore an extra flourish of stitching. These are not acts of rebellion, but grace. The loosening of seams in favor of humanity. Clothing, ultimately, was about more than status. It was about weather, labor, birth, death. A woolen coat might see 3 generations. A linen shirt might be worn for work and for mourning. These were stories woven into fabric, deeper than legality. So, as the Tudor night deepens and garments rest folded by hearth and bed, the laws fade into silence. What remains are clothes chosen with care, worn with dignity. Some legal, seen, not, but all human. And perhaps, in this hush, we ask, did the law shape the cloth? Or did the quiet power of the cloth shape the law? In the still corners of a Tudor tailor's workshop, where the air hangs with the hush of concentration and the sun filters gently through the leaded panes of a lattice window, rests the silent heart of a time-honored craft. Here, among threads and fabrics, lies a collection of tools, modest in appearance, but steeped in generations of tactile wisdom. Their surfaces are polished smooth by the persistent touch of a steady hand, their edges worn by years of quiet excellence. They do not boast, but they whisper of patience, of mastery, and of garments born from deliberate grace. Imagine a narrow wooden table, scarred by time and lit by the soft gleam of morning. Spread across it are the instruments of the tailor's art. A flat wooden block bound in coarse linen, used to press collars and stiffen cuffs. A small pair of scissors, their curved blades honed to delicate points. Needles tucked into a leather cushion, their steel glinting like stars in half-light. And a spool of fine linen thread, its edges feathered by use. These are the quiet companions of a life measured in seams and stitches. Among the tailor's essential materials is buckram, a humble, stiffened cloth of linen or cotton, soaked in high glue and dried until it holds a memory of shape. A buckram hides beneath the surface of grandeur. It gives structure to the lofty collars, bold sleeves, and sculpted bodices that defined Tudor fashion. Unseen by admirers, uncelebrated in courts, buckram is the spine of the garment, holding poise where velvet alone would falter. A hand reaches for the buckram. Its tailor, sleeves rolled and brow furrowed, lifts the stiffened cloth and flexes it between thumb and finger. It resists just enough pliable to curve around the shoulder or neck, yet firm enough to hold its place. Fashioned from woven linen soaked in glue and dried taut, it behaves like a lighter, subtler version of leather. Without buckram, the ornate collars that framed Tudor nobility would wilt into shapeless folds. Nearby, a slender awl with a bone handle rests beside a row of chalk-marked doublet panels. The tailor picks it up and presses the point through cloth, not to tear, but to create a perfect opening for a button. A soft pop breaks the silence as the awl punctures fabric. No jagged holes, no tears, just space made for purpose. Buttonholes in Tudor England were feats of dexterity, their stitches strong and elegantly uniform. The tailor chooses a length of silk thread. It's already drawn through a beeswax cake to strengthen it and ease its passage through thick cloth. Slowly, the thread pulls through velvet, forming tight loops that build upon one another, reinforcing the fabric edge with invisible armor. A single jacket might demand dozens of these tiny fortresses. No machine aids the work. The tailor's hands perform each step with unbroken rhythm. The room smells faintly of beeswax, animal glue, and linen dust. A pot of glue simmers gently over embers in a corner hearth, sending up a sweet, earthy tang that speaks of hours past and garments made. The tailor marks with chalk ochre sticks, worn flat, guiding each cut and seam with ephemeral signs that vanish beneath the final threads. Every surface tells a tactile story. The velvet snap shifts under careful hands. The starch in linen crackles faintly with movement, and buckram edges whisper roughness where fabric meets form. These are not textures of luxury, but textures of control, of cloth shaped into meaning. Outside, sounds of London flicker through the closed shutters, wheels on cobbles. It's the shout of a distant vendor, the clink of a tavern tankard. But inside, the rhythm is quieter, steadier, the crisp snip of scissors, the slow draw of thread, the whisper of needlepoint against tensioned cloth. This is not haste, this is craft. The tailor's body bends over the work, not in exhaustion, but in focus, each motion refined by repetition, each stitch, each cut, each press of the iron, done with the confidence of 100 garments before. The tools do not merely assist, they are extensions of the tailor's intent. As twilight inches through the shutters, the day's labor nears its end. The last buttonhole, stitched with care, now gleams slightly under the lantern's flicker. It holds its shape, strong, proud, and ready to endure years of fastening and unfastening in courtly halls. The collar, stiffened with carefully molded buckram, stands high, awaiting the weight of gold trim and the gaze of strangers. The tailor's hands, dusted with chalk and thread lint, gently clean each tool. The awl returns to its place beside the shears. The scissors, though dulled at the handles by years of handling, still cut with precise grace. The chalk pieces, ground short and rounded, are stored with care. These tools are never discarded, only passed down, each scratch a reminder of work well done without them. Collars would slump, sleeves would sag, seams would unravel under the stress of wear. The tailors of Tudor England were more than artisans. They were quiet architects of form. Its mastery lay not only in fitting cloth to flesh, but in using the most ordinary implements to shape extraordinary silhouettes. And now, as the workbench clears and the hearth dims, one might pause and consider the quiet significance of it all. These humble tools, waxed threads, curved blades, stiffened cloth, have held up the garments of monarchs. They've shaped the very garments worn in paintings, remembered in history, spoken of in poems. And yet, they themselves remain anonymous, silent, essential, enduring. Tomorrow, the tailor will return. The same table will greet him. The same tools will rest in their places, and the work will resume, stitch by stitch, buttonhole by buttonhole, the shaping of cloth into legacy. For in the world of Tudor tailoring, greatness was never only in the garments, but in the slow, faithful labor behind the seams, where hand met thread and tool met time. In the quiet hush before dawn, when the streets of the Tudor city still slumber beneath a misty veil, a single candle flickers to life in a small workshop tucked between the apothecary and the baker. Its light is soft, golden, warming the darkness of timbered walls and rough-hewn beams above. But it is not the sight that first greets you at ascent. The moment the door creaks open, the air speaks, not with words, nor with the hum of voices, but with a blend of aroma so layered, so distinct, they seem almost tangible. It is a symphony of smells, some sharp and metallic, others warm and honeyed, a few earthy and herbal. This is the invisible fabric of the tailor's world, and it clings to every surface, every tool, every breath. Step inside, and descent deepens. It is as though time slows within this chamber of craft. Side, the city stirs to the first soft sounds of hooves and vendors, but here the day begins in stillness. Wooden floorboards whispered beneath leather soles. Morning light, filtered through warped glass panes, falls in crooked patches across the workbench, illuminating motes of dust and thread that hang in the air like suspended memories. To the left, resting on a shelf worn smooth by years of reach and return, is a small clay pot of linseed oil, warmed gently by the lingering heat of last night's fire. It exudes a mellow, nutty aroma. The tailor dips his fingers into it, massaging the oil into a length of supple leather. His fingertips absorb it slowly, and its scent lingers on his skin like a quiet signature one that will remain through hours of cutting, stitching, and shaping. Near the oil lies a block of beeswax, golden and fragrant, rubbed into a soft shine by countless passes of thread. The tailor draws linen thread across the block with rhythmic care, coating it to reduce friction and strengthen each stitch. The scent is gentle, sweet, a whisper of the hive like raw honey mingled with sun-warmed wood. It clings to the thread, to his hands, to the very air. The tools, too, have their aroma, the cold, clean edge of iron scissors, the faint tink of steel needles, still bearing the memory of yesterday's heat, the dry dustiness of chalk used to mark patterns on dark wool. These are not loud smells, but they are constant. They mingle and shift, anchoring the room in a kind of olfactory map. Each corner of the workshop, marked not just by function, but by fragrant stock cloth, of course, plays its part. On the central bench lies a length of broadcloth, dyed deep indigo, its color drawn from woad leaves harvested in the Finlands and fermented to release their blue. The fabric gives off a vegetal bitterness, like damp leaves and crushed herbs. Another bolt, vibrant red, smells faintly of spice and earthits, color born from exotic cochineal insects traded across oceans and ground into powder. Even the raw wool, thick and still carrying traces of lanolin, offers its own contribution, a faintly animalic warmth, like sun-dried fleece on a hillside. At the back of the room, a small fire simmers beneath a blackened iron cauldron. Inside, a starch mixture bubbles gently, made from breadcrumbs boiled with water and a sprig of rosemary or thyme for scent. The aroma is soothing, part kitchen, part garden, rises and swirls with the steam, clinging to the rafters and softening the hardest smells of oil and iron. This starch is essential, lending the rigid crispness to linen ruffs and doublets that defines Tudor fashion. It is brushed onto fabric while still warm, and the scent of it lingers long after the garment has left the shop. Throughout the day, the air shifts with the tailor's tasks. In the morning, the scents are sharper, cooler, the remnants of night, air still clinging to stone and timber. By midday, the warmth of the sun through the windows releases deeper notes from the wax and leather. In the evening, as the candlelight deepens and the fire dies down, the room takes on a hush, and the scents mellow. It's becoming hushed echoes of the work done. The tailor's hands tell a story in scent as much as in callus or stain. They carry linseed and beeswax, the mineral tang of chalk, the subtle herbaceousness of starch, and even the ghost of the dyes he's handled. These are the scents that greet him as he eats, as he sleeps, as he rises again the next day to return to his bench. Beside his bench sits a wooden chest containing pouches of powdered pigment and mordants. When opened, these release an array of faint, complex aromas. Alum, used to fix dyes, smells faintly metallic and bitter. Crushed walnut shells, for rich browns, release a scent like aged wood and dry leaves. Iron filings, mixed with vinegar, produce blacks so deep they seem to drink the light, and their scent sharp, tangles of the chemical alchemy taking place in cloth in a corner of the room. A small basin of cool water, scented with sprigs of lavender and rosemary, offers respite. The tailor rinses his hands here between tasks, and the bright herbal fragrance cuts through the heavier workshop odors like a soft breeze. He wipes his tools with cloth dipped in this water, cleaning the wax and dye from shears and awls. Even the scent of metal seems sharper after this cleansing. Client made new. Apprentices, when first entering this world, are overwhelmed. Some wrinkle their noses at the strength of the oils, of the sour tink of the dye baths. But over time, they learn to recognize each scent as a signpost of a task completed or one yet to begin. They know by smell when the starch is thick enough to use, or when the wax has been overwarmed. They can trace the subtle change in the air that tells them the indigo pot is ready, or that the oil on the awl needs replenishing. The city outside presses close, but its smells rarely penetrate the sanctuary of the workshop. Only on days when the windows are opened wide does the scent of wet cobblestones or horse dung filter in, quickly muted by the dominance of the tailor's materials. Even then, the change is momentary. Here, the craft has created its own weather, its own season. As the tailor works, its movements are silent, but each task is marked by a scent. Cutting cloth releases a sharp puff of wool and dye. Waxing thread releases sweetness. Heating starch fills the air with soft, yeasty warmth. Ironing a completed garment over a padded board releases the faint perfume of rosemary and lavender from the cloth dot. By twilight, the candle stubs burn low, and a scent of beeswax thickens in the air. Shadows stretch long across the floor, and the tailor carefully folds his finished work, each doublet, gown, or jerkin, a blend of texture and scent. To the untrained eye, it is cloth alone, but to him, it is a memory made physical. The smell of a deep green velvet jerkin recalls the hour spent kneeling over dye pots. A stiffly starched collar carries the scent of rosemary, folded into every pleat. He stores his tools with reverence, laying scissors in a bed of oiled cloth, dusting awls with ground chalk to keep them dry. Even this final ritual is scented. The room quiets, but its smells remain. They linger on his fingers, in his hair, woven into the fibers of his shirt. Outside, the city breathes in the cool night. The cries of vendors fade, and the clop of hooves gives way to silence. But within these walls, the tailor's world continues in scent alone. The memory of dye and wax, starch and oil, lives on in the stillness, and one might softly wonder how many garments walk the halls of Tudor courts, still carrying traces of this little room. How many noblemen and ladies inhaled without knowing the beeswax of a candlelit workshop, the linseed of preserved leather, the faint earthiness of cochineal red. How many identities were shaped, not just by the look of cloth, but by the scent it bore from the hands that made it. These fragrances were the tailor's companions, seen, but ever present. They marked time, they recorded care. Hit, whispered, of patience and pride. And when the tailor closed the door behind him at night, they stayed behind, ready to greet him once more with the dawn. In the calm, forgiving light of a Tudor morning, when the sky outside the chamber is the color of pewter, and the air still carries the hush of night, garment begins its quiet life. Folded neatly upon a bench near a leaded glass window, it waits not, yet fully formed, but emerging, slowly, from the skilled hands of a tailor who has devoted his waking hours to the quiet alchemy of cloth and form. This garment is the doublet, a modest name for a piece of attire that carried the weight of a man's place in the world. It hugged the torso like a second skin, yet bore the burden of class, occupation, and ambition. To the untrained eye, it was merely a jacket. But to those who moved within the finely tuned hierarchies of Tudor society, it was a statementa, silent language sewn into seams and fastenings, in a modest but orderly tailor's workshop. Light filters through oiled parchment panes and lands in patches across bolts of wool and silk stacked on a wooden chest. The fabrics are muted dull, sage, bark brown, indigo faded by time, but they glimmer softly where the sun touches them. Everything here is arranged with quiet discipline. Scissors gleam beside spools of thread coated in beeswax. Tailor's chalk leaves pale trails across fabric. Needles rest like silver fish in the shallow dish beside the window. The doublet story begins not with a sketch or a flourish, but with measurement. A gentleman stands with arms slightly spread, chest still, as the tailor circles him, murmuring numbers and taking notes. Shoulders, waist, collarbone, the curve of the rib, the slope of the back, every contour matters. This is not simply about clothing the body, but understanding it. To fit a doublet well is to comprehend how a man stands in the world, how he breathes, how he turns, how he carries his authority. The fabric chosen is wool, tightly woven and dyed a solemn green, the shade of forest moss after rain. It has a quiet strength and not flashy, but enduring. The lining is fine bleached linen, starched lightly and pressed smooth. It will sit closest to the skin, a whisper of comfort against the heavier outer cloth. The tailor fingers the wool as one might test a fruit for ripeness. He feels its give, its texture, its willingness to be shaped. Padding is cut next, made from folded layers of carded wool stitched into linen casings. This padding is not ornamental. It shapes the chest subtly, corrects slouching shoulders, provides dignity to a man's bearing. Beneath the doublet, the flesh will feel the careful thought of the maker. Every inch matters. This is a craft of rhythm and repetition. Seams are basted, unpicked, adjusted, and basted again. The tailor works by natural light, his fingers moving with silent discipline through the day's slow unfolding. He does not rush. Every stitch is placed with the certainty of years. There is no waste in his movements, no flamboyance. It's just steadiness. Around him, the workshop breathes softly. Apprentices move like shadows, passing tools, winding thread, boiling starch, and sweeping shavings from the floor. They speak only in necessity. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax, damp wool, and faint lavender. Its kettle simmers on the hearth for tea, and the fire occasionally cracks like a punctuation mark in the stillness. Lacing holes are pierced with an awl, and brass eyelets tapped gently into place. The lace is braided from silk and coated with wax allow the doublet to fasten firmly, but adjust as needed. It is a practical innovation, and one that permits a certain sculptural freedom. The doublet molds to its wearer. Comes his armor, buttons. Come last, polished bone, carved with care, is chosen for this piece. They are not flamboyant, they are exact. Their placement is symmetrical, forming a line that draws the eye downward from neck to navel. The spacing must be perfect, one fraction of a thumb too wide, and the whole garment will read as careless. The tailor knows this. He threads them on with quiet reverence, Outside the workshop, life in Tudor London unfolds in louder tones: market cries, horse hooves, chimney smoke, and clatter. But within these walls, time slows. Here, a man shapes more than cloth. He shapes presence, and as the doublet begins to take its final form, something ineffable begins to settle into it: a sense of gravity, of purpose. It is no longer just fabric and thread. It is beginning to hold the silhouette of its future wearer. It begins to carry memory before it is even worn. The gentleman returns, stepping into the hush of the tailor's space. He is of middling rank, not nobility, but of standing. His boots are clean but worn, his hands ink-stained from writing. He moves with the practiced care of someone who must always appear composed. The tailor helps him into the doublet. It slides onto him like a long-held breath. The linen lining is cool, the wool settling firmly, but not tightly. The padding lifts. His shoulders slightly straightens the spine. He lifts his arms, turns at the waist. The garment obeys, but does not yield. It guides, it supports, it makes him more himself. Small adjustments are made: a little more room under the arms, a tuck at the back seam. These changes are not cosmetic, they are sculptural. The tailor's hands work gently, adjusting not just fit, but presence, ideas, coaxing out the confidence that the doublet must provide. For this is not simply a matter of vanity or fashion. In Tudor society, where every gesture could signal allegiance, wealth, learning, or ambition, clothing was read like language. A well-made doublet did not just protect against the chill, it shielded against misinterpretation, told others how to treat you, how to read your silence, how to locate you on the great map of class and power. And yet, there is tenderness in its making. The tailor, though invisible in court or council, has left something of himself in the garment: his discipline, his philosophy, his hours. Every seam carries the trace of human effort, of breath held and released, of mistakes caught and corrected. There is humility in it. When the fitting is complete, the gentleman stands a little straighter. He does not smile, but he nods once, quietly pleased. He will walk now through halls and markets, into meetings and dinners, through seasons and silences. Fire and the doublet will go with him, unspoken but constant. And later, after the garment has been worn smooth at the cuffs and taken in at the waist, perhaps passed on to another or tucked away in a cedar chest, it will still carry the imprint of a life lived. The way the linen folded at the elbow, the faint scent of ink at the collar, the small patch where it was once mended in haste before a feast. Such garments do not simply vanish. They endure in memory, in portraits, in ledger entries, and love letters. A sliver of them remains in how people walk, in how they expect to be seen. And what of the tailor? He, too, remains unseen, but enduring. His mark is not stitched visibly like a modern brand, but it is present all the same, in the strength of the seams, in the balance of the shoulders, in the quiet dignity the wearer carries into the world. And so, as night gathers over the Thames and the city folds into darkness, the doublet rests again, hung carefully on a wooden form, empty now, but still full of meaning. The candles flicker low. The tools are laid aside. Ice. One might reflect how many lives have been shaped by such simple things. How much silence has been spoken through the cut of a collar, the placement of a button, the turn of a cuff. The doublet, though still, is never silent. Speaks of history, of expectation, of quiet mastery. And in its folds, we find a world carefully stitched together, breath by breath, stitch by stitch. In the muted glow of a Tudor afternoon, when London's narrow lanes glistened with the sheen of recent rain and the bells of St. Paul's tolled softly in the distance. The color purple held a place unlike any other. It was not merely a hue, not just another pigment to brighten cloth or mark rank. It was a secret language, spoken not with words, but with threads, grammar stitched through gowns, robes, and linings that whispered of prestige, power, and profound restraint. To understand the rarity of purple in Tudor England is to enter a world where color was not chosen, but earned, not merely admired, but policed by law, while shades of russet, green, and blue could be coaxed from native plants and minerals. Purple was something else entirely, an alchemy of sea, patience, secrecy, and cost. Picture, if you will, the dyer's yard on the edge of London, not far from the Thames, yet hidden from the city's main pulse. High timber fences surrounded the yard, their planks warped by weather and stained by years of overflowing vats. The place smelled like the sea, though no wave crashed nearby. Oh, it was a dense, briny scent, sharp as vinegar, softened by the musk of decaying shells and fermented plant matter. Smoke curled upward from clay chimneys, and barrels of seawater steamed gently in the morning chill. Here, artisans labored over ancient recipes passed through generations, often orally, and always jealously guarded. The most prized among them was the creation of Tyrian purple, a dye drawn from the murex shellfish, harvested in far-off Mediterranean waters. Thousands of these sea snails were crushed to yield a mere ounce of the coveted dye. And even then, the color was not immediate. It had to be coaxed from rot and sun, fermented and aged like fine wine. At first, the extract was a sickly yellow or gray, but in the right light, with time and exposure to air, it would blossom into an amethyst, so rich it appeared to pulse with life. The dyer's hands, often purple-stained for life, moved with quiet authority. He stirred with a long-handled paddle, slowly rotating the mixture, watching for that shift, that precise moment when dullness gave way to bloom. It was a change only an experienced eye could catch, not the bright transformation of magic, but a slow awakening, a tint that crawled into the fabric like a secret. His apprentices watched in silence, breathing through damp cloths tied around their faces, learning the weight of the paddle, the timing of the turn, the temperature of the vats. Every misstep could waste a week's work, and with it, a fortune. The craft was both science and sorcery. No one dared call it alchemy, yet the parallels were clear. The dyer was equal parts chemist and priest, presiding over a ritual that turned shell and rot into wealth and prestige. His tools were humble: wooden barrels, iron pots, paddles, and stones, but his results commanded respect, even awe. And what happened to that dyed cloth? Once dried, it would be delivered discreetly to the tailor, another figure who understood both the beauty and the danger of color. In his shop, surrounded by rolls of wool, silk, and linen, the tailor would lay the purple fabric out under candlelight, letting its deep shade absorb the flickering gold. He, too, walked a delicate line. Sumptuary laws dictated who could wear what, and purple was among the most tightly controlled. Only royals, nobles of the highest rank, or those specifically granted license by the crown, were permitted to dan it openly. Even the faintest trim in purple could draw suspicion. Tailors often advised their wealthier clients to request shades close to purple, deep burgundies, near blacks, indigos. Some were bold, requesting hidden linings in true purple, which would never see the sun, but would warm the shoulders of their owners with secret satisfaction. Others wore their ambition openly and risked the fines. There were whispers of courtiers sent away from court for an unauthorized flash of violet at the cuff. The tailor's world, like the dyer's, was one of negotiation. He balanced creativity with compliance, advising clients not only on fit and form, but on legality. His shop was a place where fashion met law, and where rebellion could be stitched into a hymn. But what of those who wore the cloth? The two were purple. In Tudor England was to wear a declaration. It marked not only wealth, but lineage, political favor, and access. A key, it could suggest closeness to the monarch, or a powerful marriage alliance. In a world where illiteracy was common and communication slow, a person's garments were often the first and most lasting statement of identity. Purple did not whisper, it spoke with controlled power, and yet, for all its grandeur, purple also bore a trace of danger. Because it was rare and legally protected, it attracted scrutiny. A merchant newly enriched by trade might hesitate before ordering a violet doublet, fearing accusations of overreaching. A minor noble might ask for purple gloves, then second-guess the request. Even royalty had to wield the color carefully. Too much could appear vain, too little insecure. In this way, purple became both armor and target, an assertion of self and a potential point of downfall. Still, the color persisted. Despite the expense, the secrecy, and the risk, purple found its way into Tudor life, not in abundance, but in strategic, breathtaking glimpses. A velvet collar on a lady's gown, a strip of embroidered ribbon on a nobleman's bonnet, the lining of a bishop's robe, flashing momentarily as he knelt to pray. Even in the architecture of court, purple appeared in wall hangings, cushions, tapestries, always sparingly, always reverently. The dye itself aged like memory. Over years, its brightness might fade to mauve or gray, but even then, it carried its history, the labor of hands, stench of vats, the crush of shells from distant shores. Every inch of purple cloth was a story layered in silence and skill. In the evening, the dyer would clean his tools by firelight, his hands still slick with seawater and residue. He might speak to no one as he closed the vats and secured the yard, but he knew that what he created, quietly, humbly, would ripple through palaces and portraits, through the halls of Parliament and the chambers of queens, as dusk fell over London and the scent of brine gave way to chimney smoke. One might look toward the city and wonder how many lives have been shaped by a single color, how many ambitions fed, reputations ruined, marriages brokered, simply by the glimpse of a sleeve. Purple was never just dye. It was dream and danger, proclamation and pretense. Caint and those who handled it, dyers, tailors, and daring wearers alike, were not merely craftsmen and courtiers, but stewards of a legacy stitched deep into the fabric of England. Even now, centuries later, when purple floods runways and shop windows with synthetic ease, the echo of its past remains. We remember, perhaps without realizing, that once upon a time, this color was worth its weight in gold, earned through secrecy and skill, and born with the gravity of silent power. In the hushed corridors of Tudor palaces beyond the marble steps, echoing with royal footfall and far from the embroidered performances of court life, there exists another world. One not built on titles or proclamation, but on patience, precision, and fabric. A world stitched together not with trumpet fanfares, but with quiet breaths and a steady rhythm of needle and thread. Behind heavy oak doors carved with twisted vines and lions rampant, behind damasked curtains that dim the golden sun, lies the royal tailor's workshop. It is a modest room by court standards, narrow and windowed, tucked away in the servants' wing. But here, the air is richer than in any throne room, thick with a perfume of beeswax, wool grease, lavender, sachets, and the lingering ghosts of dye, cochineal, madder, and indigo. It is in this room that the visible grandeur of the court begins its life in silence. Tables, scarred by decades of labor, hold their treasures in orderly rose bolts of velvet, so dark they seem to consume the light, shimmering silk from distant lands, wool dyed to somber Tudor blacks and noble reds. Patterns sketched in chalk ripple across linen panels like ghostly maps, waiting to be shaped into garments that will sway in the halls of power. The stained glass window above the tailor's bench casts a lattice of soft color onto the worn floorboards, a quiet reminder that beauty here is constant but never boastful. The royal tailor's work begins long before the sun gilds the chapel's spire. Candles sputter awake in the pre-dawn gloom, their flicker catching on scissor blades and spools of golden thread. Outside, the palace slumbers, but inside the workshop there is movement, quiet, deliberate, reverent. For the tailor, every day is a ceremony of its own. He unwraps the tools of his trade scissors, sharpened so finely they sing through cloth. Pincushions filled like quivers, needles curved and forged by hand. Each has been passed down, refined by time, worn smooth by fingers long turned to dust. These tools hold stories of cloaks hastily altered before coronations, of torn sleeves mended after duels, of wedding gowns that carried hopes stitched into every hem. The tailor is not alone. Around him move a handful of journeymen and apprentices, each alert and careful, their eyes trained to recognize a puckered seam or a misaligned grain. Though the work is hierarchical, it is not cruel. The master tailor leads not through command, but through presence, every movement a quiet instruction. His hands do not merely work, they teach, demonstrating how a doublet silhouette must both flatter and assert, how a queen's train must carry dignity without burden. Forecourt garments are more than clothing. They are declarations, crafted messages woven in silk, symbols of lineage, diplomacy, fertility, and power. Each gown, each jerkin, is a cipher. The tailor, its silent author, drape a duchess in peacock feathers and silver thread, is not mere ornamentation, it is strategy, politics stitched into pleats and pearls. Yet for all the garment's grandeur, the tailor's workspace is marked by humility. There are no tapestries here, no chandeliers, only the quiet glory of craft. The tailor's bench, scored with knife marks and burnished by years of elbow and wrist, holds a singular nobility and altar of labor from which elegance is born. Mid-morning brings the first fitting. A young nobleman, scarcely more than a boy, arrives with a flushed face and nervous hands. He is to attend court for the first time. His voice quavers as he speaks, but the tailor listens more to his silences, to the way he shifts his shoulders, to how his gaze avoids the mirror. The tailor's fingers move instinctively, adjusting a collar here, letting out a waist there. He does not ask if the boy is afraid. He already knows. Instead, he ensures the garment fits like armor, for the tailor must balance form with function, elegance with ease. A stiff seam may betray hesitation. A poorly aligned sleeve can undermine poise. He knows these details matter perhaps more than the words spoken in council chambers or the gifts exchanged in feast halls. How a man stands, how a woman walks, whether a cape flows or flaps, these things whisper truths the court is always listening for. By midday, the workshop hums with focus. Chalk lines are retraced, threads are waxed and wound. Gilded trims are sewn with such care that time itself seems to slow. The tailor breaks only to sip weak ale or nibble at a heel of bread, the fabric fibers clinging to his fingers even as he eats. There is no drama here, only tension, the silent kind that coils inside stitches too tight, or when the grain of the fabric refuses to lie straight. Occasionally, a tear in the silk will summon a flinch, a muttered prayer to Saint Homobonus, patron of tailors. But mostly, the challenges are met with quiet solutions. For a royal tailor must never falter, never rush. 2 ears, not only to waste precious cloth, but to risk the image of the crown itself. And always, the background, the clockwork of court life proceeds. Trumpets blare for visiting dignitaries. Dancers rehearse. Pages rush through halls bearing scrolls and silver cups. The tailor hears it all faintly, as if underwater. His world is a parallel one tethered to courtly spectacle, yet set apart from it. He is the architect of appearances, the steward of silhouettes. As the sun tilts westward, warm light slants across the workshop floor, illuminating the details that few ever notice. The way brocade catches in a fold, the almost imperceptible sheen of linen well pressed, the knot of thread tucked so neatly that it vanishes into the weave. These are the tailor's legacy, not statues, nor paintings, nor heraldic songs, but seams and shapes, invisible to most, vital to all. Sometimes a member of the royal household will visit unannounced, a duchess needing a hem raised discreetly, a courtier with a torn cuff after an evening duel. These visits bring with them urgency, but also trust. The tailor knows when to speak and when to keep silent. He has seen things: tear-stained bodices, anxious brides, aging monarchs with growing bellies. He asks no questions, offers no judgment. His work is to cloak, to preserve, to beautify. Evening comes slowly in the tailor's world. As other palace rooms fill with laughter and lute music, the workshop dims. Candles are lit anew, their flames casting soft halos on the tools now resting on their velvet cloths. The apprentices depart one by one, bowing low, leaving behind the gentle echo of their footsteps. The master tailor remains. He walks the workshop in a quiet ritual, a straightening, a pattern here, brushing lint from a sleeve there. His eyes settle on the garments in progressa, crimson cloak for a bishop, a mourning gown for a widowed countess, a wedding dress whose hem is kissed with blue for fidelity. Each carries its own story. None will bear his name. There is a paradox here that he has long accepted. His work is indispensable, yet invisible. He shapes appearances, yet must himself remain unseen. He holds, quite literally, the fabric of court identity in his hands, but it is the wearer, not the maker, who is honored. This does not embitter him. If anything, it deepens his devotion. For what is a tailor, if not a steward of legacy, a silent confidant to cloth and character? He thinks, in these final hours of the day, of the tailors who came before him, of the apprentice who once taught him the curve of a French seam, of the old master who showed him how to measure a man without making him feel small. Their names, too, are gone, but their work lives on in the tools he now uses, in the stitches he still sews the way they taught him. Outside, the palace is quieting. The corridors fall into shadow. The torches are lit, but in this small room, time bends. There is only the whisper of fabric being folded, the click of a lid closing over spools of thread, the sigh of a man placing his needle to rest. And in that silence, a final question lingers, gentle as a crease in silk. How many tailors have shaped the very look of power, not with ink or command, but with cloth? How many hands have guided history, not by sword or speech, but by seam and silhouette? No monuments will be built to them, no songs will sing their names, but in every portrait, hung in a gallery, in every preserved gown or coronation robe, their presence endures anonymous, eternal. Thank you for resting here a while, for stepping into the quiet world of soot-darkened pots, morning fires, in the quiet care of a cook who stirred more than just soup. If your eyes feel heavier now, it's only the calm weight of time wrapping gently around you. May your night be as steady and comforting as the rhythm of a spoon on iron, soft and unhurried. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, you're warmly welcome to subscribe. If it feels right, and if you're still awake, feel free to whisper where you're listening from, or just say good night below. For now, sleep well and let the past keep you company a little longer.